20 years ago, children's mental health services were, I would say, the word awful. There was a few things that were given and provided to children and families, and it was ineffective. I worked in that, and I knew and felt that I could do better.
You're listening to Stories from the Top, an inside guide to better business development. We are here with Mel Bwint, the CEO of CFF. How do you like to describe CFF for people who haven't heard of it?
CFF, Child and Family Focus, is a community-based mental health. We specifically work with children. So we provide community-based mental health services, and we have a variety of services that we provide. So in a nutshell, what we're trying to do is to help families, whether it be recover or heal, and also keep them in their own home, in the community.
Very cool. So what did you originally go to school for?
So I went to school. Well, basically, my story is I didn't want to go to school. But thank God my father made me go. No questions. You've got to go to college. So I went to a small liberal arts Christian school called Eastern College at the time. Now it's Eastern University. And I picked psychology only because I didn't want to be an engineer. I didn't want to be, in the medical field. And fate has it that this became the driving force of what I was about to do in my future. So psychology was my background. And started in the field just like anybody else. Back then, you just go to work. Right after college, you just go to work. And I did that and just learned a whole lot of things. But what it did was it gave me a direction on what I wanted to do, which was to help. And got me into meeting some incredible, incredible people that I still remember. They made an impression in my life. In terms of recovery and resiliency. And some of that came about when I was working directly with individuals recovering from drug and alcohol addiction. And just learned a whole lot. But within that time, I also learned that I really enjoyed and liked and wanted to improve processes and programs. So that got me to thinking about, where I wanted to go. And so here's a guy who hated school. Honestly, I did not want to go to school. I hated it. I did not enjoy undergrad. But I was focused then in wanting to go on to get my master's, so which is what I did. And from that point on, it's been just onward. And the excitement in terms of, improving programs where I'm at really just solidified in me.
Did you have, when you were getting your psychology degree, anything in your childhood that kind of led you in that direction to start with, or was it just the most attractive option?
Well, it was the easiest option. But looking back, my mother was probably my main influencer. She is a psychiatrist, retired now. But we would talk at different times about people in general. And I think that spawned, a little spark in me, an interest. And I don't recall all the conversations anymore, but they were impressionable enough that I think that was the direction that I went into. And certainly when I got into the field of social services, she was instrumental in helping me to understand, the human aspect of it. It was good. It was and I think that was one of the ways that I look back and kept me going. And she very humbly said certain things, but they resonate.
What was the first job out of school you had?
The first one was actually very innovative because it was the first adult community residential rehabilitation services. And it also served those who had drug addiction. And it was in West Philadelphia, and I remember I had the third shift, 3 to 11 shift, and talk about, impactful things. I remember this gentleman who was my client. His name was David. He was about 44. And looking at his history, he had his master's in mathematics. But he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. And he became, part of this residential facility. And we were sitting down one day, and I remember this vividly. And David looked at me, and I said, "David, what are you looking at?" Because I'm looking at you. I want to be just like you. And there was a moment of sadness that came about, because here was an accomplished person at 44, graduate. I think he was from University of Penn with mathematics. And he's looking at this young person just fresh out of school. And the sadness was the disease really took his life away. And, I don't recall any other conversations after that, but that made an impression of what, an individual living with mental health disorder, was kind of feeling at that point. And I'm 22 years old, looking at me as the example. So that blew my mind.
Excuse me. So when did you decide that instead of just working for other people's organizations or practices, that you wanted to start something of your own with more of a focus?
So my history and my development took me down 7 to 8 agencies. So I worked and I grew. Part of it was my desire to improve programs and to innovate that, I just kind of just took hold of and just was driven to improve services. So that being said, there was something that in terms of goal setting that I did long ago, which was I would like to have my own place at a certain age. And I set that goal. So for those who are listening, setting goals do work.
Real quick, when you were what were you seeing that you thought needed to be improved in practices that it became your passion to improve?
So my agency, Child and Family Focus, is 20 plus years now, just barely over 20. But at that time, 20 years ago, children's mental health services were, I would say, the word awful, because there was very little options. There was a few things that were given and provided to children and families, and basically it was ineffective. So I worked in that, and I knew and felt that I could do better. And the better is not for me to start something and, ooh, look at me kind of thing. But it was more of the children and families deserve better than what it is. So I started thinking. I started listening. Child and Family Focus started with listening to families telling me what they need. And, back when, and probably even past, there was a notion that families don't know, professionals know. So back then, there was very little choice. And I'll be honest, there was very little innovation, because this was what it was and people accepted it. And for me, that's not what I accepted. I cannot live with this statement that if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That is totally against what I believe.
So I'm curious, what kind of feedback were you hearing from the parents, and what problems were you seeing that were not being met in the current state of the industry?
So everything that back then was fairly siloed. So meaning you have this service and this is it. You don't cross into another service. There's no looking at individualization of services. So part of what happened to me was I was in an opportunity to look at and blend different services by using the same staff. So basically the families were telling me, hey, you know us. Why don't you work with us when we're discharged? And that really became the resounding opinion. And I was hearing that all the time. And I started thinking, what can I do differently? And one of the other things that I'm struck by is that we're all told once you're in with the service, you have to just, break away from the family. Honestly, I never really believed in that, because one of the things that work in terms of anything is the relational piece. That's the connection that's there.
Mm-hmm.
So I started questioning, how can we maintain some level of relation, but some level of continuity of care? So I started playing. But playing was really utilizing what exists and pairing the staff who was involved with the family to follow them into the home. And by gosh, that worked. And that really set the stage for me to think differently about community-based services.
So when did you officially start CFF?
So once the goal was set, it was 21 years ago, with the thought of what to do and what type of service. And by that point, I knew children's services. And I didn't know the ins and outs, but I knew enough that I knew where the barriers were. And I was involved with all the licensing. So all these nitty-gritty things that I needed to know, I knew. That being said, trying to start something on my own with no funding was a little scary. Well,
Yeah,
to be honest, a lot scary.
what were some of the steps you had to take to get up and running legally, and then?
Yeah, so what we do at CFF, most of our programs are licensed. So, but before the license, you have to get endorsed. So somebody has to believe in your vision and your idea that this is going to work. So what that means is that the county would have to say, hey, we believe in you. We're going to support you. We're going to write you that letter that is needed to go for your licensure. So that's really the essence of how any licensed organization gets started. From that point on, you're on your own. So back then, it was really a strong discussion with my wife, and we put our home up. Home equity line was what started CFF.
You used that for the initial funding?
Yeah, we did. And, looking back, I wouldn't have changed anything for the world. I wonder whether provided funding would have changed who we are today, because we learned a whole lot about doing the best we can with what's given to us.
Wow, so you really invested yourself into this business. How much did you have to put down to get started?
Monetarily, here's the interesting thing, and I think that this is because I knew well enough the financial piece of it, the billing piece of it, and the mechanics of the service itself. So initially, we were looking at upwards of 50, 60,000, but it never took shape because, thank goodness, we were solvent in 3 months. But what that took was billing, services that we performed that day, that night, trying to, generate income. What I also did, and this is something that was planned, that I would not draw a salary for the first year. Everything was pushed back into building CFF, so affording, the office space and the staff, everything went back. And I just worked 3 other jobs and to do that. But the focus was to build CFF, but I knew that I needed staff. I couldn't do it alone.
So was that 3 other jobs at the same time as you were building
Yeah.
CFF?
Evenings, weekends.
What kind of jobs?
So I would do on weekends counseling, individual and family therapy. One point I was doing a courier service where at 5 o'clock I would put on a different shirt and somebody would, chirp the Nextel phones and, hey, go here, pick this up. And I wouldn't say that was the most profitable. My wife would say, that was stupid. But the biggest thing, and I hope that the listeners will understand this. It's not hard to start a business. It's hard to do the business. But before you do that, you have to wipe away or figure out how to deal with the fear of failure. And my story goes where before it started, I was kind of like, oh my gosh, I'm trying to support a family of three. I'm the breadwinner. I'm leaving a good job with benefits and starting something with nothing. Scary times. But what got me over was this realization, and this hit me well and timely too. And this was that, hey, I can get a job anywhere to support my family, to support what I'm, whatever I need to do. I can get a job at not McDonald's. I don't want to say McDonald's is a bad job. It's a great job. But I could get a job anywhere. So then that really helped me to understand the fear factor in this. That's a show, right? Fear factor?
Yeah.
Yeah. But, it got me really focused, and it was like, hey, do the job. You know what you need to do, start doing it. And my development, so it took a year and a half. And when I tell you that there was barriers upon barriers, but my belief is if there's a barrier, I'm going to hurdle that. And that's what happened. So it was a drive to make this happen and not let anything interfere. And I'm very thankful, that those things happen. And that's part of why I believe that this notion of if somebody else can do it, why can't I? And I'm pretty much a fix-it guy. I'll figure out something, and if I can't do it, then I'll reach out.
So once you had funding and things were greenlit for you to go ahead and start CFF officially, what was your first step? Finding staff, a building? What was the most?
So in order to obtain the license, you had to establish that you have a place. So I had to find an office space. Again, no funding. This was out of pocket. So I found a one-room office in Phoenixville. And that set the stage for what to come. So the way in my business works is somebody from a licensing inspection would have to come and say, oh, hey, Mel, you're legitimate. Child and Family Folks has an office. There's telephone, because I think a lot of times people will say, oh, I'm starting a business and I'm providing services, but they don't have a location. So location was a key. And then from that point on, it was really trying to attract people who, would fit the agency, our mission, who we are. So what we've done over the years, and we still continue, is this. When the first staff came, I said, okay, you're here now. Bring somebody good. So we've grown from word of mouth, basically. And that's who we are.
For hiring?
For hiring, right. That's been the best way to grow. Yeah, right now, it's a different story, but,
So were you using that initial funding you got yourself to pay for them until you could get billing, like to catch up with salaries and stuff? Or how did that work with paying
Pretty
them?
much, yeah. That's how it worked. But again, to be solvent in 3 months, meaning we had a cash flow because the billing cycle was just immediate. And that was one of the things that, over time I had to learn what that meant. So the aspect of billing. So basically, when I started, I had to know every aspect. I was also part of the treatment team because the service that we provided required a master's level and a bachelor's level. So it's a team approach, and we would go out and work with families providing therapy and whatever crisis intervention, all those things. It was a 24/7 type of service. So we did that. So I wore many hats, and gladly, after hours, I cleaned the office, and whatever it took really was the model or the philosophy and things.
So in order to get that billing cycle running, where did you guys go to get your first series of clients?
So the way our service works is at the time the referrals came from outside. So either directly from families or it came from the insurance company. So they would call and say, hey, Mel, we have a referral for you. Here's the location. Here's the specifics. Let us send you the initial information and let us know whether they're appropriate for service. So we would have to go out and meet with the family, do the assessment, and then report back, and then they would authorize. So the authorization is typically, for that service, was 8 months. It may seem like a long time, but it's relatively short. When you think about all the issues, we weren't just dealing with the child, we were dealing with the entire family. So that was the level of high intensive service that we provided.
So I'm curious, how did you make the connection with these insurance companies? Like, how did they know to recommend you?
So once you are licensed, you also have to apply to get into the network. So just like, right now we have insurance for medical, right?
Hmm.
When you go in the portal, you'll see all the network providers. Somehow you have to apply and be accepted into the network. Similarly, that's how the mental health insurance works too. So we
So
had
once
to
you're
apply.
in the network, they just see you on a list of providers
Right.
that they can recommend.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's the entire process to accept insurance as part of someone's
For
service.
Medicaid services, yeah. And certainly you have to be licensed, you have to qualify. I mean, there's a lot of things that there's a lot of demand in terms of, the requirements and expectations.
And you guys didn't have any issues getting through any of those licenses or anything?
Sure. We were startup, we had issues, but again, I welcomed inspections because part of what state inspections and licensing inspection, they're trying to help you. So we looked at it in a different way. And I work for other agencies where, oh my goodness, licensing is coming, let's hide everything. No, we're open book. Help us to grow, help us to be better at what we do. And that's been our philosophy to this day. And I can tell you that I'm so proud of the staff here because we achieve high standards. In fact, I truly believe that we have changed over the years the playing field for children's mental health services. We've elevated others to do better. And I'm proud of that.
So during these inspections, what kind of things are they looking for? Like, how does that inspection work?
So the inspections are, so every client that we have to keep a clinical file. So that's all their demographics, all their information, all the clinical contacts. So that's one piece. So we call that paper review. Then there's the physical site. So they'll go through and do safety check of the building. And then they may also go and interview families on how we provide services. So there are a lot of indicators that they will look at. Some they publish, but it's up to us to meet those standards and continue that. So what we charge and try to do is to go beyond those standards. To us, meeting standards is the minimum. When it gets really cool is when you have families saying, thank you for doing this, and this is nobody's ever, looked at us in a different way, and so it's about service. It's about doing the best we can clinically and just as people, interacting with I have always said to the staff, we are privileged to be able to go into a family's home where they open their doors and they're all their stuff is, we get to see that. We get to be a part of the family. What a privilege that is.
You mentioned goal setting early on. In that first year of starting the business, did you have long-term goals of where you wanted CFF to get into?
I did not. And I think there was a reason why I didn't. And part of it is that I didn't want to get way ahead of myself. We had to focus on day to day. But one thing that I did know was diversification. There was always a mindset of innovation and diversification that was from the beginning. So there were other services that I thought about, but I was not going to start things simultaneously because I needed to have a foundation. So it was one particular service. We did it really well. And that's how we grew. So we started, and part of what happened in my field is that, outsiders start to recognize, families specifically started recognizing, hey, here's a good agency. They listen to us. They work with us. They're with us. So that started to grow. So that really helped in terms of the referrals. And then the other thing is that government agencies, insurance companies start to see what we're able to do, and they start to present things. And that's the cool thing. So we've grown, by word of mouth and at some level, those who, wanted to do something differently or innovative, they'll partner, they'll call me and they'll say, hey, Mel, we want you to think about this particular service that we're thinking about. Would you partner with us? And what do I say? Absolutely. And so there are things services that we provide today, and that's exactly how that came about.
So government agencies were suggesting, what kind of agencies would be suggesting services to you guys?
So our main body that we work with every county has a mental health department. So we work with the Chester County, Delaware County, Montgomery County, all the counties that we work with. We work specifically with their mental health department because we are a children's mental health agency. We are also licensed to provide foster care, and recently we were approved to do adoption. So that's very exciting. So, and it is all children's mental health services and also foster care.
So how many employees did you guys have, and how long did you stay at that Phoenixville office? Like, let's talk about that first year. How many people were there? And
so, when you go back to thinking about, long term, I did not predict how long we were going to be, nor did I envision what was going to happen. We lasted a year. By the end of the year, I had 10 staff in a one-room office in Phoenixville. But it was an incredible energy-filled office. We were having a blast. But we outgrew that in a year's time. So we went to another office, probably 3 times the size. Another thing happened. We lasted a year there. We outgrew that. So that's been our history of outgrowing. And then one of the things that happened within that time was Bucks County Mental Health reached out to me and asked us to come in and provide the family-based mental health services. And we started branching out in that fashion. So it's really counties reaching us out to say, hey, we want you to partner with us to do this, is how we've grown. So we're currently in 5 different counties. And in some particular services, we're the biggest provider of that service. It's called High Fidelity Wraparound Services. So we are and I have to say this, I'm so proud of this particular service. And it's not a clinical-based services, but there was a time when federal government came to look at this particular service, and the state of Pennsylvania identified CFF as the provider of choice. And they came and did an interview, a 3-day interview, also had families interviewed separately. And at the end of the assessment, this is what they said. And I'm so proud still of this. They said, based upon what we've seen of high fidelity wrap services in Montgomery County, Pennsylvania is in good hands. Could not have asked for any better response from the feds.
Wow.
Yeah, that's amazing. So as you were growing, how did you maintain the quality of staff like that you wanted to have from the beginning? It started with people referring each other that you knew and trusted. How did the scaling affect your hiring and training?
One of the things that I focused on was culture. Having worked at 8 different agencies, I learned different cultures, and I made a promise to any staff that I will not create, I would planfully try to create something of an organization that, why would I create something that I didn't like to be what CFF would become? So that's always in the back of my mind of, I knew that I can't do it alone. And I wanted to make sure that staff had the environment, the culture. So the culture became a big thing. But before then, it was the mission. The mission of who we are is what drives what we do. And I say this day in and day out. So part of my job was to share the vision, share what we're trying to do, why we do what we do, and continue that process. So we've been building and improving on our culture. So along the way, There are moments that I remember where things like being able to afford health care for staff. That was one of the proud moments. The other was 401k, having that platform or a vehicle for future. So along the way, the other thing that I looked at was what I call no guilt leave days. So we just created full 17 days for everybody. And hey, you need to take a mental health day, you take it. So, and I'm proud of the fact that we're continuing to build a foundation of, it's just a great environment. The work-life balance was really critical. One of the things that I said to my wife and my kids was, I didn't want to start an agency and be one of those dads who worked 80 hours a week. Mm-hmm. And I think I achieved that because I didn't want to miss out on what's really important. Because it's not fair to the family because this is something that I wanted to do. Why should they, I wanted to be a part of things. So as much as I could, I was there, and sure, can I do better? Absolutely, looking back. But I feel good that right now we have such a work-life balance here that I think my staff feel very good about that.
And how have you handled training with staff as they've come in and out of the business throughout the years?
So some of the services have built-in requirements for training, and it's an external training, so we would maximize that. But I'll tell you, a lot of the best learning happened internally, and that's through a team approach. And sure, we didn't know, a lot of, we had lots of training needs. So we would try to individualize to what the needs are to the staff and create some sort of a curriculum for them. The good thing about in my field is that there are lots of trainings that are available. Now they're available online, so it makes it even easier. But there's not a substitute for face-to-face supervision or training. And we've been building our own internal training program here. So, so there's many ways to, try to get staff well-trained.
So that excuse me, that training process, you said it's mostly face-to-face. So does that mean you're sitting down with them as they're working with real clients, or do you have like simulated training sessions, or what? Or do you use anything other than face-to-face, like any video content, any like handbooks or anything like that?
Sure, there are lots of modules. I mean, so I can think of various different ways, and we want to call it didactic training is the way, so it's a blend of instructional versus hands-on. We have opportunities where the supervisors, and we talk about a field, training, so to speak, is when a supervisor goes with the staff and they're in the session, afterwards they can have feedback right away. I wouldn't say that we are like a higher education institutional kind of training program. We're not that. So we're more field oriented. And the supervision really doubles as partial training because that's where the dialogue happens where, hey, this is what was presented in the session and wasn't quite sure what to do about this. So then they would, discuss plans and so on. And then if there's a learning need where it goes beyond what the capability of the supervisor or director, then we start to look differently. I'll give you an example of one that we all had to learn was when we serve individuals from different cultures, cultural differences, cultural norms are important. Certain cultures where, the father will not talk to females. So that presented as a dilemma that we had to understand. And that's what we did. So we learned that culture to say, okay, we cannot proceed because the impact would be that it's an immediate barrier. The father, because culturally different, is not going to be participating or be a part of it. So we had to work around those things. So those are ever changing and ever learning. So, as you know, our society is becoming more blended. So we've got so many cultures coming in that we have to stay on top of that.
So what was the core service you started with at the very beginning?
And that was interesting question because that was one of the things that I had to figure out. One, it was on a financial end, meaning that I could not start with some sort of a facility-based. So I did know that. So community-based really became the thing that I focused on. And it was a service that was not known to many. So to give you to the point to this, in Chester County, where Child and Family Focus was endorsed, we became the third agency to provide this service. In Bucks County, we were the second. So that's how new it was. The family-based mental health services is the highest level intensive community-based service that exists. So what I used to say to staff who were involved with that, I would say, hey, listen, I'm going to tell you something. I don't want you to get demoralized, but if we fail, then the child leaves the home. It is that intensive, and we have 8 months. And oftentimes we couldn't finish the job, basically. And I hate to capture it as a job because it's not really that. But we couldn't complete the service because our job is to stabilize the family and move them on to another level of service where they'll continue on. And that's a hard concept for, all of us because we want to stay with the family and continue. So that was a big learning curve. But I had to find this vehicle that met the licensure for what we were trying to do, but also make it so that I wouldn't incur the cost of a residential. So that was one that I did figure out prior to in the business side of it.
So just a quick follow-up question. That sounds like a lot of pressure as a business owner to have that high stakes. I mean, you're talking about a child leaving their family if you don't complete the job that you're setting out to do. Mm-hmm. Does that weight follow you home at night? Is it hard to sleep knowing some of the situations that your patients are dealing with?
As I said earlier, it was the 24/7. So we're responsible 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And the answer is yes. But I've had to learn to figure out how to do this. And it's not that I don't care, but I had to put it aside. So the only word that comes to mind is compartmentalizing. I've had to do that. I've had to focus on different things, shift. And along the way, I had to help staff shift as well because the intensity of what we're trying to do is incredibly draining. Think of bringing on another family's, issues. And because therapy works when there's investments on both sides. So, we either try to figure out how to deal with the sheer amount of things that are brought into our lives as we provide therapy. I can't imagine the Texas situation. Mm-hmm. I was listening to the news, and basically a pediatric surgeon was helping some of the kids who were brought in, and she just broke down on the interview and basically how it just, after seeing so many kids, this still was devastating. So imagine my staff bringing on home all those issues, So we've had to figure out how to debrief. So what we figured out was after every session, we would talk about it and plan, and when there's a crisis, we're all together, doing it together. So, and that was one of the things that my kids hated was the beeper would go off. Time of beepers, right? Yeah, the beeper would go off and we're like, oh no. So sure enough, there's usually a crisis. We have to get out to the house, try to, stabilize the situation. And again, if we fail, if it's unmanageable, then the child gets evaluated at a hospital or police are called. And that's a scene that nobody wants. So yeah, so trying to figure out, I say this to my staff even to this day, take care of yourself. This is hard. This is really hard. And I'll say this, I don't need you for the short term. I need you for the long term. And then we would continue to talk about what that means.
So it sounds like you have some processes in place to evaluate the mental health of your own staff as well after they're working on this job, which is it's emotionally taxing in its own right. So you have some processes to evaluate their mental health. I guess like you were saying with those days off and the talking about what's going on after each interview. Is there any other processes you have for that mental health of your staff?
Yeah, I think part of what we have is an openness to be able to discuss those things, and one of the things that my directors and supervisors do really well is stay in touch and be attuned to what's happening with their staff. And one of the ways that we just kind of get together is when there's something big happen, we all, as I said, get involved and try to help each other. From an organizational level, there is the, process outside where they have access to counseling. We also have our own trauma program inside. It's called the CARES team. So recently, in order to kind of help process the tragedy in Texas, there was a mass email that went out basically describing, acknowledging what had happened and what staff can do. We would present various speakers internally to talk about, current situations that's impacting us from the outside world. Certainly the, year and a half ago with George Floyd's situation, all those things. So we try to just kind of stay together and address all these issues that may come about. But for clinical, we're just open. My door's always open. Somebody can always come in. So that's how we have an open door policy where any of the staff can reach out.
To move things back to your guys' services, I know you started with kind of a community focus. Obviously now you guys have tons of different services. Are most of them expansions from suggestions from government bodies like you were saying earlier, or are those things you kind of saw a need for and started filling that need?
It's actually both. So we benefited from, partners coming to us and saying we want you to do this with us. But at the same time, we're also looking for growth. So, and my model of growth is really not to overextend us. And that's really important for us because part of what I've learned over the years is that I worked for agencies where growth was for the sake of growth only. And what it only does is it waters down the quality, and I made a point way back before I started that I will not do that. That's a mistake that often happens. So we have grown based upon need and certain things that will happen where, unbeknownst to me, what was on the other side, it would be a conversation about a topic that they would ask me a question. And then at the end of the conversation, they would say, "Hey, would you like to submit a proposal?" So I would say like, "Oh, okay." So those are some of the things that have happened. But we have been, over the last 10 years, probably been more aggressive in looking at, okay, this particular model of need meets our mission, and we want to expand into that. So, yeah, so it's been both.
Okay, cool. So, are you guys fully funded through billing at this point, or how do you guys raise funds and continue to stay funded to properly run everything?
Most of the services are Medicaid, or what we call fee for service. So the way it works is we do the work, we bill for the work, and we get paid for the work. And then there are some programs that the county specifically fund us annually. That being said, we still have to meet their benchmarks and indicators, that we're doing what we're supposed to. So it's a blend that we've looked at from a business side of it, keeping that balance. We don't want to be too top heavy on one end of service, because if that seems to, dwindle a little bit for whatever reason, then you got problems. So we did identify that. So we've been balancing out 60-40%. So 60% Medicaid and 40% county funded. And we kind of look at that, every year to see where we balance out.
Yeah, I guess too, you guys want to keep your services needs based, not, well, we get the most money from this, get more people who need that service or whatever. So
Exactly. And I've often been asked about from even my staff who wants to start their own business, and we'll sit down and chat, and also to my children in conversations we'll have, and I'll say, hey, don't chase the money. Chase your dream, but don't chase the money. And if you perfect and work on your dream and it comes to fruition, then eventually, not eventually, but money will come. I think about the young today where, the quick money, quick schemes, as I call them, you see them all the time, and you get drawn in. I get drawn in. But the thing that I've learned over time is, try not to chase the money.
So what is the drive that you're chasing, if not the money?
To provide better quality services for children with mental health disorders, plain and simple. I saw in many ways in my history of 30 plus years, almost 40 years now, that families were not provided good services. That's the honest truth. It was just whatever was available is what they got. It didn't meet their needs, but that's all you got. That's it. So I really felt that CFF could make, provide not only better service, but innovative services that really meets the needs of the family. And this agency is a not-for-profit. It will go on forever if I have my wishes.
So I have another question about staffing. So once things grew to the point where you needed people on an admin side, beyond the counseling and those types of services, how did you go about finding people that were a good fit for the culture of the company when they're not really in the counseling field? You know what I mean?
So that's an easy answer, because in any business, you have to have the financial acumen and the ability. And I was fortunate to have a friend that I worked with, who I worked with, and who still to this day. So we've been partnering together for, 35 years now. So, there's a level of trust that I can't even reproduce in terms of his skills. So we work very well hand in hand, where I'm able to focus on the program side of it, and innovative side of it. And the financial pieces are handled by my CFO. So he has his own team that we've been building over the years. And, just like with size, you just need to have that infrastructure in order to function. So we recognize that, but we will always be mindful of not overextending, even in the internal structure. What that means is that I never wanted to be top-heavy administratively, because what we do is really is for the staff, for services. So everything is very lean here, and I'm proud of that.
Yeah, you always hear those horror stories about nonprofits that like 99% of their stuff goes to admin and stuff. So it's good to hear that you guys are focused on not doing that.
Yeah, we've always been ahead of the game. And in fact, I'll say 10% was what our line is. That has not changed. And we were even questioned by counties saying, how can you do that for 10% admin line? But we've done it, and we'll continue to do it as long as, we're able to. And I don't foresee any reason why we can't.
Yeah, that's like the best bang for your buck you can get as far as supporting a nonprofit goes too. That's really good. So, how did you guys fare through COVID as that came in and kind of attacked the ability to go see people in person, which I know is really how you guys are able to connect with people?
Sure. All of our services are face-to-face in the community. So when COVID hit, the whole world, as you know, went virtual. We were locked down. We had to deal with our own. So part of the steps that we took was ensuring the safety of staff. I remember sending out a memo, basically saying to staff, "Oh, we'll be back together in 2 weeks." Well, that didn't happen. 2 years where we were all remote. So, and what I am so appreciative is the government also recognized the need for this service, so they adjusted, released certain regulations on how we can do the service. So telehealth became a way to do this. So they released more of how we can do telehealth, and that really helped maintain, some level of connection to staff. They also provided ways for us to continue to function because at the time, staff were dropping out. There was a lot of fear. I mean, that's all we thought about. Looking at the numbers of the infection rate and all that, and then all those measures. So, but I can say that I am so proud of what our internal process. We really worked hard to make sure that our staff understood what our agency's protocol is in terms of in-office and out-of-office. We supplied all the PPEs, and we continue to do that. And providing technology in order for them to stay connected. We did things that I thought everybody did in terms of how to stay connected with staff, meaning like we had events online that we were presenting, like magic show, those kinds of things to keep us connected. We would have various meetings just to stay well connected and well informed. So we did as much as we could. And our COVID infections were low, I think comparatively. But what happened to CFF was we learned a different way. And CFF by and large is a tremendously, I would say, gifted in terms of responding. We respond to situations incredibly well, faster than I've ever experienced any other organization. And that's a testament to leadership. So we responded in whatever we needed to do to make, one, the livelihood continue to provide services. And it also changed how we looked at our own offices and how we function. So what that means is that we actually went hybrid. Community-based going hybrid is kind of like, wait, what? But what that means is that our staff no longer have to come into the office as a base. They can go from home. We're still trying to go community-based, but then there's now the telehealth that will allow us to do in situations where families are uncomfortable. We can still continue therapy that way. So it has changed how we function. So we've actually retracted some of our office spaces because we don't need as much anymore. So that's one of the benefits. But we're also mindful of the downside is the connection. We are relational people. Things that I'll miss are the days of all staff being here doing potlucks, things like that. So now we're saying, okay, we're still going to do that, but it's just going to look a little bit differently. So we're a very flexible, adaptable agency. That's another thing that I think, because we are our own independent, we're able to do these things with relatively no red tape. And I'm for one that basically does not believe in having policies that are so antiquated and outdated that we just keep it because we've had it. Mm-hmm. We're able to look at policies and procedures and adjust it. And you know what? If this doesn't work today, we're going to change it. And I love that about CFF.
Mm-hmm. So did you guys see an uptick in a need for your services during that time?
I would say in certain services, yes. The youth, we're talking about 18 to 26 age that we work with. There was a tremendous need that came about. But the majority, this is the resiliency of families. As much as before COVID, there was a lot of crises, they held it together. And I look at that and say, wow, This is about, you know, how people come together. And to me, that was so hopeful because in some situations with families that we deal with, it is chaotic. It is just, generational. But how about a pandemic to bring families together, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't see a lot of uptick in need. Now, that being said, one thing that we were all concerned about is because the schools went locked down, we don't know where child abuse. Um, you know, a lot of times the majority of the reports happen in schools where the school personnel would be reporting child abuse. So we're worried about that. And certainly we're starting to see what's happened since then is we're starting to see more of the traumatic side of, on our children. So so I think the uptick is going to be post-pandemic.
So we've yet to see the effect.
Maybe I should see it.
So do you guys have any I know you've kind of been reactive to kind of meet needs more than proactive in expansions and stuff. Do you guys have any future goals at this point, or are you still kind of will go where we need to go?
We will always be needs driven, but there's also a realization that our agency, in order to continue our efforts to serve as much as we can, we need to have a level of diversity, level of growth. So we've started our 3-year strategic initiative that is looking at new opportunities. So I say this in many ways to many staff that we need to grow a certain percentage in order to keep what we have. That number used to be 10% growth. That's climbed now. So part of my job and my CFO's job is to look at what is happening to the environment, and out of anything, there are different opportunities. So we're looking to expand what we do. So that's one of the things. You won't find us branching out into all areas of whatever service. It's focused on children's mental health. And the good thing is there are clearly openness to innovation. So what we want to be is then the driving force of looking at services and say, hey, you know what? Here's something that is a need, and let's figure out how to provide this type of service that didn't exist. But possibly the outcome could be greater than what the past services that exist. So we're in a phase of innovation and looking at growth in a different way.
So one other growth question. With the federal government looking at what you do and seeing that it is really, top of its class, did you have any plans on expanding beyond the location of your service area into other states or into other counties or anything like that?
We have looked at it before, but one of the things that I do know is that there's a lot of work in our communities now. So part of it is the connectiveness that I talked about before, where we want to be reachable to staff. There's something happens. Our model is we have offices in now 5 different counties, and they're within, hour and a half. We may go a little bit beyond, but then what happens is it makes it the connection. We've seen the connection and how I would want that office to embody the culture, and it gets harder. So we're not one of those, global agencies that can just, because we provide widgets. We're not providing widgets. We're providing services, and we know that in order to continue to foster and keep the mission in mind, we've got to have that stronger connection. So proximity becomes a big issue for us. So the short answer now is that probably not. We're going to stay within. So right now we're in Montgomery, Bucks, Chester, Delaware, Lehigh, and Northampton.
So, is there another way that you can spread that positive influence that you're having on the industry to other parts of the country?
I'm sure there is, and I'm not thinking that way.
Like, I mean, I don't know, is there trade associations or anything like that for the mental health community that you guys are sharing ideas and things like that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, our agency is involved on a statewide level, different committees and so on. Um, and yeah, and we do reach out certain programs that are from out of state that was brought in. So, for example, one of the programs really started in the state of Washington. So we did stay connected, but then there's, kind of disconnect. So we are one of those agencies that if somebody reaches out and says, hey, help us, with whatever, we're here. We're going to help. And I'll say that, I said earlier that a lot of my staff, or some of my staff actually, would say, hey, I want to start my own agency. And I look at it in a way of, I hope you do, and I hope you're successful. I'll help you anywhere I can. I'm not going to fund you, but I'll help you. Because what that does is it expands the field and the services with quality, because, they're just continuous extension. And if they grew out of here and had the desire to do that, my gosh, go for it. I'll support you.
Yeah, speaking to that, your growth has sounded very natural and great success through your 20 years. What advice would you give to someone who wants to start their own nonprofit, or maybe they have one that's just not doing well?
That's a great question. I think first it starts with, really what is the purpose? Defining why this person would want to start. What is the need? Doing some sort of an assessment on that. Once you have that, once you have an idea and a vision, then comes the practice of learning what that would look like. What is the business? What are the parameters of, if it's licensure or whatever things that you need to start. And I think the biggest thing I would say is know the business as best as you can. You're not going to know everything. I didn't know 100% of what I was about to do. I learned. I think it's more of attitude, and the desire to not give up. It's easy to give up. I've seen that so many times, and you'd be amazed that you just have the attitude of, if there's a barrier, I'm going to hurdle that. There is a way. Find that way is what I would say and encourage, because I think there are plenty of good people who have so much to offer that little startup that says, I'm starting something on my own. Oh my gosh. And as I said earlier, it's the failure piece that usually stops. A lot of businesses, I mean, we're fortunate. I think that we were successful from, the very beginning. But I think it's a testament to knowing what the business is. But once you have the knowledge, you have to do the business. You have to show. Nobody's going to give you anything. So it does take hard work, but the end result is amazing.
Can you share any specific examples of some of those obstacles that you really had to come up with a creative solution to solve?
Yeah, I think back then it was really the licensing pieces, tackling, the location pieces. I'm trying to think of a good example.
Any stories that jump out in your mind of just really a challenge that you had to overcome?
I think really the biggest hurdle was just trying to sell the idea, the mission, the model. Was really difficult, because that was taking a stab at something that didn't exist. meaning that I was creating an image, an idea of continuity of services. And so, going back, the first question, or one of the first ones, was about what was the whole process. I had to get the endorsement from the county. So to have the audience, just to even have the audience, because they were in a position was, we're not endorsing any new agencies. Why should we, So it was hard to get that. Once I got it, then I had to make sure that I was convincing. But it wasn't hard because this is what I believed. And I think that's the testament, is that if you believe in it, it's going to come out. It's going to show people who are listening that, this is just not I just want to start something. This is something different. And it's hard to quantify that a little bit. But it's, so, I mean, there's been so many different barriers, but I just don't remember specifically, but I just know that I hurdled it. I had to, because I did not want anything to stop this. And that was the attitude.
So, if anyone wants to get involved with CFF now, how can they help you guys out?
Oh gosh, we need a lot of help. We need great people. We will, there's so many openings, and there's a sadness to what I just said about openings. To me, if there's a lot of openings, that means we can't serve those needy, the families who truly need it. So come join us. We're a tremendous agency. You're going to learn a whole lot. You're going to be challenged, and become part of our family.
We'll leave it right there. Mel, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah,
Thanks for having me.
Stories from the Top is your guide to successful business development. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, or find Edge of Cinema on YouTube. Stories from the Top is an Edge of Cinema production, hosted by Matthew Skura and Jeremy Schmidt. To learn more or get in touch, visit edgeofcinema.com/podcast.